Hey, I'm Ravi Lulla of Hurrdat Sports Radio. You can listen to me and Damon Benning live every morning, 7 to 10 a.m. We're on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, as well as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, where you're finding me now on the live stream here. I don't know if it's still considered breaking news at this point. It's been a minute, but Trev Alberts is out at the University of Nebraska. He is taking that same position at the Texas A&M University. This has been a really strange day and really strange situation throughout. Obviously, DB and I will talk about this a lot tomorrow, but wanted to get some thoughts out there live now as I'm getting a lot of interaction on Twitter, and people are pretty angry, justifiably. Chris on Twitter already asks a very fair question. What the heck is he leaving for? And I think that's the question that's going to dominate the discourse about this moving forward. And to be honest, we may never really know the situation on exactly what happened here, because I doubt the people that are to blame are going to be very forthcoming about that information. I have some theories based on how this is all played out. And I'm going to kind of go into some of those now. I know DB will have some thoughts about this tomorrow morning as well. He's obviously got a long-standing relationship with Trev, as we talked about this morning, and it's a really disappointing day just in general. It seemed like for a moment that it was going to go Nebraska's way. After the early report this morning from the Houston Chronicle, it seemed like about mid-afternoon that Trev was actually going to stay at Nebraska. And I heard some information at that point. It seemed like a lot of people in the industry did around that same time, 2:30 to 3:30, somewhere in there is when it seemed like most of the people started hearing that some progress was being made in the right direction for Trev Alberts to stay at Nebraska. And the way this thing played out, obviously, this is a choice that Trev Alberts made, right? So I'm not going to sit here and absolve him of responsibility. If you've heard me on the morning show at all, you've heard me talk about in every situation that you're in or somebody else is in, you can always take 1% responsibility for something that happens, right? Anything that happens, you play some role in. And maybe it's a very small role in something like this. Maybe it's, the 99% share, but so I'm not letting Trev off the hook for this. What I will say is I think there were some really extreme circumstances that led us to where we are right now. And DB talked about it this morning. If you check out the Hurrdat Sports Twitter feed, we just sent out the clip this morning of DB saying the only way he could see Trev Alberts leaving right now leaving Nebraska is if there were some extreme issues in the power dynamics, the power structure of the University of Nebraska. And with Trev leaving, I'm left with nothing to think except for that is the case. That while it seemed like there was being progress made toward a resolution between Trev and Nebraska, it seems like leadership blew it. I really don't know how else to put it. It seems like the leadership of the University of Nebraska, obviously you've got an interim president, you've got the Board of Regents. Those are kind of the main players here. And obviously there's a lot been made about the political forces at work to that have influence over those positions. And that's certainly a factor, but there's really no other way to slice this for the way that I saw it play out than the Board of Regents, the interim president, kind of wet the bed. They wet the bed on this one. I don't know how else to say it. I don't know how you let this guy leave your university. I don't. This is a guy that John on the YouTube comments says start naming names. It's the Board of Regents and the interim president. I don't have their names right in front of me. The interim president's name is a little tricky. I was having trouble with it this morning, but Board of Regents and the interim president, those are the people that we're having issues with right now. Those are the people that either allowed or created circumstances in which Trev Alberts felt he had to leave. John says the PEDS from the 1890 initiative on that. I don't know about that one. What I do know is it seems like there was momentum towards Trev Alberts staying after the initial report this morning, and that momentum stopped abruptly and immediately. I think that Trev Alberts genuinely wants what's best for Nebraska. I do, 100%. I also think that he was only willing to tolerate so much from the Board of Regents. So he made this decision. You can't remove him from it. But I think what you have to remember here is there's a lot of other forces at play that Trev has no control over. I also think it's important to remember that a guy that I think a lot of us thought would be at Nebraska long term, and Ted Carter left not that long ago, also under the same leadership of the interim president and the interim and the Board of Regents. This is, he's not the first one. Ronnie Green left as well recently, or somewhat recently. This is kind of a trend of people leaving Nebraska, but this is the one that is the most concerning because of who Trev Alberts is. His name is literally on the stadium. He is, I said it this morning, he's Nebraska through and through. For him to come to a place to even consider leaving Nebraska is something crazy in the power structure must have happened or must have started to play out. And I don't know what that is yet. I hope that we find out. And I've had a lot of people, whether on Twitter or on the YouTube comments or wherever, say this is something that the journalists in this state have to get to the bottom of. And I agree. I don't consider myself a journalist, but I'll ask the questions and hopefully someone provides answers. And the number one question for me is how do you let this happen? How do you let this guy who is absolutely the epitome of Nebraska and Nebraska athletics and Nebraska football specifically in Trev Alberts, and is doing what I consider to be a good job, right? He's doing a good job. He got Matt Rule, which appears to be a terrific hire. He made the right decision in letting Fred Hoiberg stay on and restructure things and continue to rebuild Nebraska basketball. That looks like a terrific decision right now. And he was trying to get this stadium renovation done, this almost $500 million stadium renovation done. And I think that's where we started to run into problems. I think the problems started with the ability to get the thing done that he thought he was going to be able to. And I think that comes to political agendas, policy agendas, whatever you want to say, with the Board of Regents. Here's the good news. The Board of Regents is an elected position. If you don't like what happened today, if you don't like what happened with Trev Alberts, yeah, you can be mad at Trev Alberts, and that's fine. But you can also elect new Board of Regents. That's an elected position. If you don't like them, you don't like the leadership, you don't like how things have gone, elect new leaders. Plain and simple. And I think there is a disconnect between the Board of Regents and the actual people in the state of Nebraska, because the people of the state of Nebraska obviously did not want Trev Alberts to leave. The people of Nebraska want Nebraska football to be the thing that we believe it can be. And that's, this isn't to say, hey, let's go back to the 90s, whatever. This isn't that. It's to be a competitive, competent football team. We think we have the right coach to do it, but how many times have we talked about on the morning show, it starts with a unified vision from the top down, having the president, the board of regents, the AD, and the head coach all on the same page is what leads to long-term sustained success. That's not something Nebraska has right now. We thought we had it with Ted Carter and Trev Alberts and Matt Rule. Finally, it felt like we had it. And all of a sudden, because there's other people at play there in the board of regents, that you lose Ted Carter, and now we lose Trev Alberts. And I think the fear here is that it will cause Nebraska to lose Matt Rule. And I hope that's not true. I hope they go out. I hope they make a great hire at the AD spot and they get everybody back on the same page. But here's the problem. You got an interim president. You got a board of regents that is going to be viewed unfavorably by pretty much everybody who's seen this situation play out. A, who's actually making the hire of the next AD? And B, are they going to want to come and work for a place that a guy like Trev Alberts just left? That's my concern. Is if you're, the name Jamie Pollard's been thrown out a couple times, the Iowa State AD, who I like a lot. I think he's done a good job. I think Matt Campbell's a really good football coach. I think that Jamie Pollard's been really patient. Obviously, TJ Otzelberger was a great hire as the Iowa State basketball coach. But if you're Jamie Pollard, do you really want to go to a place that couldn't get things done for basically the favored son of Nebraska and Trev Alberts? I mean, people kind of forget that, like, before Scott Frost was the golden boy, Trev Alberts was the golden boy. And he was maybe one of the only people that had the ear of a lot of the influential people in the state of Nebraska. And if he can't get it done here, if he can't get the board of regents to be on the same page and get the things done, then I don't know if you're somebody from the outside, how good you feel about that situation. I want to catch up on some of the YouTube comments here. Something that keeps getting brought up, is the lawsuit that is pending, is in process, however you want to say it. Michael from I believe Facebook chimes in and says this having to do with the recent allegations. I assume Michael's talking about the lawsuit involving Chuck Love and the women's basketball program. Here's the issue there. It's possible. I'm not going to say no. I don't know for a fact that it's not. What I will say is, if that was the case, I don't know why Amy Williams would still be coaching basketball, because she's named in that lawsuit also. If that was the case, I don't know that going somewhere new protects you more in terms of your job security and things like that. And finally, obviously, leaving the university doesn't clear up, that doesn't remove him as a defendant in that lawsuit. He still has to deal with that regardless. And to me, at least, this is just kind of my thinking through this as logically as I can right now, is I don't think he's more protected at Texas A&M than he would be at Nebraska. That's just my initial gut thought on that. The Jeff chimes in, and a lot of people have chimed in about the state of Texas A&M as a university and their board of regents and the politics involved there. He says if he has problems with direction or input from board of regents, he will find out what interference or meddling really is at Texas A&M. Boosters have a lot of say in Aggieland. Yeah, they absolutely do. That's 100% true. And I made that point earlier on Twitter when I was like, I don't know what the fit is here. If you're looking, if you're Trev Alberts and you want to have a less messy situation, I'm not sure Texas A&M is the place to go. What I do wonder here is if Trev Alberts, I kind of tend to think that Trev Alberts doesn't leave this situation unless he is convinced that him being there cannot fix anything. That's kind of where I've landed on this. If he thought he could fix this, and that's what I think the meetings were today. It sounds like he was meeting with a bunch of people of influence within and without the university today. And if this was something that Trev thought he could fix, I really doubt that he'd be leaving. I think that's what he was trying to find out between the report this morning and him actually leaving late evening or later afternoon, early evening. It's possible, and I'm just speculating here because that's all most of us can do in this situation. It's possible that Trev thought the only way he could help the situation is by leaving, that might serve as the wake-up call to the Board of Regents to pull their heads out. I don't know. What I do know is what DB said this morning, that this is something that would have to be really serious for Trev to leave. A lot of his adult and professional life was here in the state of Nebraska, obviously playing, being the Omaha AD, coming to Nebraska. He is burning a lot of bridges here by making that decision. And from what people have told me who know him well, he wouldn't do that without being very calculated. And if he, being a super calculated guy, thought this was the best move, burning that many bridges, and frankly, probably not being able to return to the state of Nebraska in any real meaningful way. Like, I don't think that's exaggeration. I don't know that Trev Alberts is welcome in the state of Nebraska after today. And that's a big deal. A lot of his professional and personal relationships are with people here that he has burned pretty aggressively. And that's not something I think he would have done lightly. What I keep coming back to is maybe this is the only way he thought he could help. And it is, maybe that's assuming too much out of Trev. Maybe it's assuming that he's a better person than he is. I don't know. I don't know Trev Alberts. I really don't. I've met him a couple times. He probably doesn't even remember meeting me. It's especially at the time I did not have, it wasn't on the radio. I didn't have, it was just kind of in passing, right? So he probably has no reason to remember meeting me. So I don't have any insight into him personally the way DB will tomorrow morning from 7 to 10. But from everything I've heard, this seems really out of character for him, which leads me to believe there is something really, really serious that he didn't think he could fix. And that's the scary part, is a new AD doesn't fix that. A new, even a new president doesn't necessarily fix that, because you still have to deal with the Board of Regents. Catching up on some of the YouTube comments here. It's Danielle says it's possible that he's just a snake. I don't know. I really don't. That's not the sense I've gotten from people that do know him. But at the end of the day, that's not something I can really say confidently one way or another. Daniel on Facebook asks, how much more challenging would it be for current ADs to even consider coming to Nebraska, given the issues with the leadership? Yeah, that's part of the big problem here, is when you lose a guy like Trev because of how connected he was to this and how ingrained he was in Nebraska culture, and he leaves, it's going to be a really hard sell for another AD to come here and say, yeah, this is going to be fine. Now, people in those types of positions are ambitious people, and they think, a lot like coaches, they tend to think they can fix anything. And so I'm sure someone will take the job, especially at a price tag of probably close to $2 million a year. Somebody's going to take that job. I don't know who that's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be the first choice. I would guess probably not. If you've got a pretty good job already, I'm not sure you really want to wade into those waters, dealing with what appears to be a huge leadership problem at the University of Nebraska. There's on Twitter here, Amazing Daniel says, if the lawsuit, which was mentioned earlier, reveals he did something fireable, he's likely not safe at A&M either. That's kind of why I don't know that I think that has a lot to do with that. Brandon on YouTube says problems at UNL have been there for 3 decades at least. When Harvey Perlman first stated that the football program had too much power over the university and the higher ups allowed him to do so. Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. There's a really weird dynamic between athletics and the university sometimes, not just in Nebraska. This is a lot of places where the athletic side of the university is sort of looked at with derision, and the academic side a lot of times has a sense of superiority or resentment towards the athletic side because athletics gets the headlines, the TV, the TV money, and the academic side, which is originally the core of the university, right? Sometimes they're hurting for funding. Sometimes their faculty gets cut, things like that, where that doesn't seem to happen with athletics. Now, there's some pretty obvious reasons for that, right? Athletics generate their own revenue. So it's a lot easier to get the budget you want when you're generating your own revenue. It's the same thing with football versus a non-revenue sport, right? It's easier for football to get a budget for something than baseball or baseball, bowling, whatever. Nebraska supports their sports pretty well, but there's sports that obviously bring in less or cost money to the university, and there's there can be some resentment there for football, but it does really feel like the Board of Regents is trying to wrestle the power away from the athletic department and football specifically, and they're doing it at the cost of the thing that this university is known for. I've never understood the tension between the university and athletics really at any place, not just Nebraska. This is more generally speaking, because athletics are typically the face of your university, for good or for bad, right? When Baylor has their scandal, that impacts the university as a whole. When Penn State has their scandal, that impacts the university as a whole. When Florida Gulf Coast went on a Sweet 16 run as a 15 seed, their admissions rocketed up. I don't remember the numbers, but it was something like 500% of their applications went up after that March Madness run. The front porch, the face of your university, is athletics. That's the thing people can see. It's really hard to quantify a great research program or a great law program or whatever, right? Nebraska's really proud of the medical center and things like that, but that's hard for people outside of Nebraska and the university to see. It's really easy to see Nebraska football on television. Trev had the right idea in a rising tide lifts all boats situation with Nebraska athletics. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear that the university powers that be had the same view of athletics. They didn't realize that when athletics rises, that can raise the profile of the university as well, especially when you have people like Trev Alberts and Matt Rule in charge of your most valuable property, right? I don't know anybody that would be ashamed of putting Matt Rule in front of the world and saying, like, this guy represents our university. I would be ashamed at this point of trotting out basically any of the Board of Regents right now and saying these people represent our university. You know why? Because at least today, and it's seemingly for a while, they haven't represented the university very well. And that's literally their only job. That's where things have started to get totally off kilter. I'm going to try and catch up on some Twitter comments here. Cole says it's the Regents. They're to blame, all of them. They're ultimately the reason we lost Ronnie, Ted, and now Trev. Hard to get along with and unbearable to work with. Brian asks, did he really not see himself as being strong enough to overcome what failures that might be there? That to me is a question that I think has to do with what we saw play out today. I mentioned it a little earlier, but it seemed like he was trying to figure out if there was room to work with the Board of Regents still. And it seems like the answer was no, because this morning report came out from Houston Chronicle that this was getting close to done. And then by about 2:30, 3:30 in the afternoon, that it seemed like Trev was staying. It seemed like there was positive momentum. Not more than about an hour and a half later, the whole thing fell apart. What that says to me is the Board of Regents made it clear that they were not going to make things easy to work with, or that they just weren't going to work with him at all. In which case, what's the point of continuing on in that role if the people that largely control your destiny tell you that they're not going to work with you? Again, not absolving Trev of any blame. He still is the one that made this decision, but there's plenty of blame to go around, and I think you have to start with the university leadership, the interim president, and the Board of Regents. Andrew on Twitter asks, without a president in place, I don't see them getting a decent hire anytime soon. That's kind of the problem here. You almost have to hire a president first, because I don't know an AD in their right mind that's going to sign on to be an athletic director at Nebraska and then have somebody who didn't hire them become their new boss. That's asking for a terrible, terrible situation. And man, that's going to be really hard to find a good AD without having a president in place, which means that this AD search could go on for a while, because there's no president in place. It's been, I think, 7 months. That's going to be a problem. Mr. Stark himself says, I know we can't lose Rule. First thing I do is go to him to see if there's anyone he recommends. And there might be somebody that Rule's worked with in the past that makes you feel a little bit better about Rule staying at Nebraska. Moving on down here, Andrew says Ted, Carter, and Trev leaving is squarely on the Board of Regents. Ryan suggests Barry Alvarez as Tep AD to restore stability. I don't know if Barry's taking that job. I think he's got a pretty cush consulting role with the Big Ten right now, or Fox Sports, or one of, I don't remember which. But he's on that one. The checking up on Twitter here, Generation Red Ken says he's from the Generation Red podcast. The Trev has always said leadership matters. If those above him were giving him a hard time, I'm editing there a little bit, then I don't blame him one bit. Hurts like hell, but it's understandable. I think some people are still going to blame Trev Alberts here. And you know, I think a certain amount of blame does have to go to Trev, because I mean, ultimately he's the one that made the decision. RRS says should have listened to UNO football and wrestling fans. He used NU for a bigger paycheck. I don't think that's what happened. I'll be honest with you. It never occurred to me that Trev Alberts might leave Nebraska until this morning when we saw that report. It never crossed my mind. And then all of a sudden it happened, right? And that, to me, you know, all of a sudden the report comes out, and that's really the first time I even thought that it could be a possibility. And even then, I didn't necessarily believe that was going to be the case. As we continued on throughout the day, you know, it started to make some sense as people connected the dots between leadership problems and Trev not being able to figure those things out, and being able to work with those people. That overwhelmingly seems to be the thought on why this has happened. I don't think it is. I don't think it's necessarily about him trying to get a bigger paycheck. And I could be wrong. Like I said, I don't know him personally, but I'd be surprised if this was about money. I think this is about leadership. I think it's always been about leadership. Going back to the YouTube comments, Aaron says he believes Rule will be out during the next coaching cycle. I hope that's not true. Josh J says Rule will leave once Penn State opens up. I mean, that's always been a bit of a fear. Conservative Husker says, has he come out and spoke about it? No, not that I'm aware of. I don't believe Trev has spoken yet about this. I'm guessing we won't hear from Trev on the Nebraska side of things. I that's my guess, is that any answers that we want on this is going to come from, I think any answers we get on this is going to come from the Board of Regents if they ever talk about it, and I kind of doubt they will. Typically, if leadership is not strong, accountability is not going to be real strong either. And I doubt that these people who most of us don't even know their names, myself included, without looking them up. I don't know that these mostly anonymous people, I know Jack Stark's on there. That's about the only one I know off the top of my head. I don't know that these mostly anonymous people are going to just volunteer to take accountability for a wildly unpopular thing that has happened here at the University of Nebraska. Now, we probably will hear from Trev when I assume there'll be an opening press conference regarding his hiring at Texas A&M. But I don't imagine we're going to learn anything about what happened at Nebraska here. I think he's probably going to say, oh, this is a great opportunity at a great university and all that. And that's all he really probably should say in that scenario. John on Facebook says he should come out and just light the Regents up. Someone needs to be honest about it. I mean, because right now everybody's sort of skirting around the issue. Everybody's kind of just talking about, oh, well, they were pushing policies and they're hard to work with and all these things, right? And that's fine. But somebody needs to talk about it. Somebody in the room needs to talk about it. And I mean, I'll ask the questions like, what were they trying to accomplish here? What were they trying to accomplish that led Trev Alberts out the door? That's what I want to know more than anything, because if you lost sight of what's important at the University of Nebraska so much that this favored son, this golden child of your athletic director, All-American football player, came back, hired the right football coach, kept the right basketball coach, trying to get a stadium deal done. If you lost sight, so you're running that guy out the door or forcing him to feel like he has to leave, then somebody needs to hold those people accountable. And I said this before, the only way I know how to hold them accountable is to vote them out, because it is an elected position. Because I don't think they're going to answer to anyone, right? They're not going to hold a press conference and tell you what happened with Trev Alberts. They're not going to hold a press conference and say, well, this is what we were trying to accomplish, and Trev and us couldn't see eye to eye, and so he ended up taking this other job. I don't know what exactly are the core issues here, but it overwhelmingly seems to be something with the Board of Regents being difficult to work with. And the problem is, as John puts up, a lot of these people have big money backings. Now, I don't know how supportive those big money backings are going to be, because most of those big money backings were also backing Trev, to my understanding. Now, there may be a split there with, I know not all of the big money donors are always on the same page, right? That's not a real thing. But to my understanding, most of the big money donors were incredibly happy with Trev Alberts. If that's different, someone has to tell me, because I have not heard anybody with real power be upset with Trev Alberts. Now, there's people with real money and real power that back these Regents, and it's going to be a really interesting butting of heads here, because Venn diagram has a lot of overlap. Justin says, get out, vote, and research the candidates for Board of Regents. 4 positions are up for re-election this year. Yeah, 4 positions could flip the scenario here. I mean, I believe there's 8. I believe there's 8 Board of Regents. I'm going based off of these pictures that people keep sending me on Twitter of the group here, and I'm trying to find it real quick. Yeah, it looks like there's 8 Board of Regents, so you can flip half. You can flip half the Board of Regents right now. That's a viable option. Now, I will say this kind of makes the, this kind of makes it important to see people on the ballot that you've never heard of. If you're going to go out and vote and you want to figure out like, hey, what's best for my community, whatever. And I'm not taking any stance here, right? But I don't think anybody thinks Trev Alberts leaving is best for the Nebraska community. So that's sort of the stance I'm taking with the Board of Regents. I don't know a lot of people that know very much about the Board of Regents when those elections come up. I bet they'll know a lot more this year. That would surprise me if people don't know a hell of a lot more about the Board of Regents this year when re-elections come up, as opposed to in years past where, like, oh, I've kind of heard of Jack Stark. Let's pick him. And I don't know if Jack Stark is a problem. I really don't. But that's kind of the issue we're talking about here, is these are largely anonymous positions that have a incredibly outsized power and outcome over our community. So, I mean, Justin's right. Get out there and figure out who the candidates are and if they line up with what you want the university to be. Because obviously, from what the reactions I'm seeing here today, and from what I think I know about how this played out with Trev Alberts today, obviously the priorities of the current Board of Regents do not line up with the priorities of the state. I haven't seen anyone really step up and say, you know what? I'm good. Good riddance. I mean, now people are saying good riddance, Trev, right? But not while it was still possible he was going to stay. I don't know anybody that wanted Trev to go, unless you go all the way back to the UNO football and wrestling fans that have always had a hard time with Trev. Andrew asked what these policies are. My understanding is taking power from athletics and putting it back in the university. That's kind of always been the struggle, as somebody mentioned earlier, over the last 20, 30 years, not coincidentally coinciding with the time that Nebraska struggled the most in football. That I believe is what's happening here. And this isn't a political thing for me. This is a Nebraska football thing for me, right? I don't care what the policies I do care, but I don't think this is about the specific policies or the specific politics of what the Board of Regents was trying to accomplish. What I think it is the fact that they were putting their priorities over the priorities that Trev Alberts thought were best for the university. And if that's the case, there's really nothing Trev can do about that. Maybe he can wait him out. Maybe he could wait through the election and whatever. But that's about all he can do if that's the problem. And that seems to be the problem. People chiming in again that, is it about the lawsuit? I don't think so. I don't totally know, right? Because nobody totally knows what's happening here. But again, if it was the lawsuit, I think we'd be looking at Amy Williams being in a different situation than she's currently in. I think we'd be looking at him being suspended or something. I don't know that going to Texas A&M solves the lawsuit situation for him. I mean, it certainly doesn't remove him as a defendant. And I don't know that going to a new place protects him more than a place that has an affinity for him. I don't know. That's a hard sell for me, that going to Texas A&M somehow protects him either legally or job security wise in a way that Nebraska doesn't. That's a tough sell for me. I'm not saying it's impossible. That's a pretty tough sell for me. Conservative Husker says, how is Raiola and the rest of the big recruits feeling about this? I'm going to be honest. I don't think a lot of the football players individually probably have real strong feelings about what's happening with the athletic director. Now, if that causes Matt Rule to leave, obviously you're going to have different issues. But I think that's the closest the connection would be between Raiola or anybody else on the football team and what happened here today. Sam on Facebook says, this has nothing to do with money. This is about a board of regents that are Osborne haters, don't care about football program, and the governor's office all being terrible to work with. That's certainly a prevailing opinion today. And that's a, I don't have anything to refute that at this point. I don't have anything to refute that is the case here. Continuing on, Joanne, I'm truly disappointed. My guess is he is leaving. Will sink the football program. I certainly hope that's not the case, but that is one of the main fears here, is without having somebody like Trev steering the ship, that you're going to end up in real trouble as a football program. Dion says, sounds like the regents want to put their hands in the cookie jar. I mean, that's certainly one way to put it. Keep going down on the YouTube comments here. Really appreciate everybody chiming here on this last minute late notice. Derek says, call or email your regent to voice your concerns. I did. That's certainly a fair way. I mean, that's one of the only ways you can let people know about how you feel about this situation. Charles says, is Trev still named in that lawsuit? Lack of support on that subject may well be a factor. And maybe that's the case. He is still named in the lawsuit as far as I know. That nothing has changed there. Maybe the university was not being as supportive of him as he would have liked. Maybe Texas A&M pledged support. That's entirely possible. David chimes in. Trev is running from the problems. You're either part of the solution or part of the problem. And like I said, I don't want to absolve Trev of anything here. This is obviously his decision at the end of the day. I'm really, really curious what led to that decision. What priorities of Trev's were clashing with the priorities of Trev or the athletic department or Matt Rule or Ted Carter, who is gone now as well. I don't want us to forget about, this is not Trev leaving in a vacuum. We've already had some other concerning departures here, whether it's Ronnie Green, whether it's Ted Carter. There's been other concerning departures here before Trev Alberts. It's really hard for me to say this is strictly a Trev problem. This seems to be a university problem of losing people that are viewed well outside the university. So I think that's a major issue here. I don't think you can look at this in a vacuum. A couple of people have asked about names of either interims or replacements for Trev. I imagine, the name that comes to mind is Doug Ewald, who's kind of his right-hand man. But if this really is a headbutting between the regents and the interim president and Trev, I don't know how eager they're going to be to move Trev's guy into that role. And maybe Doug Ewald's going with Trev to Texas A&M. I believe he followed him from Omaha as well. So, that's the only name that comes to mind. I know somebody brought up Dr. Elza from the football staff, that she ran the Texas Coaches Association, High School Coaches Association, that before Coach Rule brought her up here. I don't know what her qualifications are. Obviously, she's highly educated. I just don't know job wise what she's done to. And maybe she's a great candidate. Maybe she'd be the full time. I don't know. That's a name that I've heard. In terms of permanent replacements, people have said Jamie Pollard. I think Jamie Pollard's a really good AD. I think you're going to have a hard time getting a really good sitting AD to come to Nebraska until the leadership situation is figured out, no matter what that is. That is, I think that's a real concern here. Some people have said Bruce Rasmussen as a interim AD, and that is, he's obviously a steady hand. I don't know how that would go over with Nebraskans to have the former Creighton AD in charge for a little while, and he's never run a football program, so that's the other concern there with a guy like Raz in an interim role or a permanent role. The other name I've heard for a permanent one that was, I believe, up for it last time was Ed Stewart. He's a guy that has obviously Nebraska connections. He's been in leadership roles in, I think, the Big 12 conference. Another name that came up with Garth Glissman, obviously has Nebraska connections, and I believe he's like deputy commissioner of the SEC right now, something like that. So, there's options out there with Nebraska connections. I don't think it has to be a Nebraska connection, but that might be an easier sell. For somebody considering the current leadership position. I'm going to wrap that up here. I really appreciate everybody chiming in and being a part of this conversation. A good 45 minutes here, and I appreciate all the interaction. I'll be back on tomorrow morning, 7 to 10 a.m., Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at Hurrdat Sports for all of those as well. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more conversations, and honestly, I'm really interested in talking to DB about this because he's definitely going to have a lot. I know he's upset about this, and so that is, I'm hoping he has time to kind of process what's happened here and figure out. Hopefully he knows. Hopefully he's got some answers. I don't know if he does, but hopefully he's got some answers for that as well. Minus says DB for AD. Selfishly, please let him continue to host a radio show with me. I would appreciate that. But I appreciate everybody chiming in. We'll be back tomorrow morning, 7 to 10 a.m. Hurrdat Sports Radio and Hurrdat Sports on AM 590 ESPN Omaha and ESPN Tri-Cities. Thanks, guys.